Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of The Truth-Seeking Mama. I'm your host, Arlene Triolo, and today we're going to tackle a topic that I've been thinking about a lot since the Charlie Kirk assassination. It's a topic that I believe every Christian should think about, especially American Christians, and it's a concept of Christian nationalism. If you can't already tell by my accent, I am not American, I'm European actually, but I've immigrated to this fine country, and when I lived in Europe, neither Christianity or nationalism was really a big thing, but since the rise of the right all around the world, and especially also in Europe, this is actually becoming a topic that is more and more relevant. Now, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, Christian nationalism is either your great hope for America, or it's a great threat to democracy. But here's the twist. So I think that what most people are calling Christian nationalism today is not actually Christian. It is more pseudo-Christian or maybe even Catholic nationalism. Okay, so stick with me as we get into the weeds, and I pray that God would use this video to give us greater discernment and wisdom about what is good, right, and true as we go through this together. So since the 2024 election, there's been a massive resurgence of the political right, and at first glance, it seems really good for Christians. We're finally gaining ground on the culture wars. We are upholding family values, defending the unborn, protecting children from gender ideology, all things that most Bible-believing Christians care deeply about. And don't get me wrong, these are all wins that I am genuinely happy about. But everything that is light is not necessarily good or from God. So stick with me on this one. Conservatism isn't biblical Christianity. And now with a complete splintering of the right, their lack of Christianity is actually becoming more and more obvious. I wouldn't have said this in the past few years, but I think Christians should be careful when they call themselves or identify themselves as Republicans or conservatives. In America, Christianity and Christian values have gotten blended and blurred to something that looks conservative, sounds moral, but that really isn't the gospel. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Look at the loudest conservative voices, the people shaping culture, the people leading the charge when it comes to the right, the Christian right, and the people who are ultimately responsible for Donald Trump's election victory. We have people like Matt Walsh, Megyn Kelly, Michael Knowles, Layla Rose, Candace Owens, and they are all Catholic. Fox News itself is a majority Catholic network. The majority of commentators on there are Catholic, that's what I mean. And the owner, Rupert Murdoch, received a knighthood from the Pope, although he declares himself to be Protestant, most likely nominally. And newer voices like Isabel Brown, who has recently joined the Daily Wire, as well as Nick Fuentes, are also Catholic. So I'm not saying that I dislike any of these. I really don't. And while I don't agree with everything these commentators say, I find myself agreeing with large portions of it because it aligns with my Christian values. All of these guys are a lot smarter than I am, and I don't want you to think for a minute that there's anything wrong with maybe following them or listening to them occasionally. But I will say they are all Catholic, and I will come back to why this matters. Then there's the influential culture-shaping think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and their Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation created Project 2025 as a detailed blueprint to reshape American culture through conservative social policies. It reflects a movement focused on legislating morality rather than transforming hearts through the gospel. Project 2025 is a clear example of trying to Christianize culture with political strategies instead of genuine spiritual renewal and heart change, which can only really happen through the gospel. And then there's NAR, New Apostolic Reformation, which from the outside world looks kind of Protestant Christian. It's not Catholic, certainly, but it's a kind of pseudo-Christian charismatic movement that promotes the belief that God is restoring the offices of apostles and prophets to lead the church in transforming society and usher in God's kingdom on earth. I could do a whole episode on NAR and how twisted their theology is, but all I will say is that NAR is mostly focused on earthly dominion and modern apostleship that kind of distort the gospel, replacing the gospel with a quest for political and cultural control. Cool, right? Well, not really if you are an evangelical Christian like me. Like many of us who have identified with the right or being conservative or maybe being Republican, I didn't even realize this kind of stuff was lurking on the right until I really began to investigate more deeply ever since the Charlie Kirk assassination. And it just made me really question the whole idea of being on the right, conservatism, especially Christian nationalism. What I realized is this: these organizations are fighting the culture wars loudly, but they are devoid of the gospel. They do not preach the gospel, and the gospel is the only thing that can transform lives and hearts. Do you see where the difference is? As a Bible-believing evangelical Christian, we know that the law can't change anybody. The law can't change hearts. We saw that in the Old Testament. It is so clear. The law exposes sin. It doesn't fix our hearts. It doesn't fix our human condition. Even if we had a Christian America where abortions are banned, gender transition for minors are banned, pornography is outlawed, it would still not save a single soul. Let that sink in for a second. Why? Because laws just don't transform our hearts. Only the gospel can. I get it. You might think, yes, but we're rescuing children. We're protecting their innocence. We are taking criminals off the streets. We're making sure that we leave a better country behind for our children. And I agree with that. And I think that too. But Jesus didn't come as a political ruler or a lawmaker. He didn't come to run for office. He didn't come to gather an army. And in a sense, that's why many people in his time didn't believe in him. Because remember, they wanted him to be the political ruler. On one day, they laid out the palm branches and said, "Hail, Hosanna," or "the King of Israel has come." And then a few days later, they crucified him. So yeah, Jesus didn't come as a political leader. Jesus, the King of the universe, he came to be meek and to be a humble servant, to die for sinners, to offer forgiveness to anyone who recognizes that they are a sinner in need of God's forgiveness. He offered grace, not legislation. That's why Christian nationalism, if it's truly biblical, isn't about shaping laws. It's about speaking the gospel to shape and transform hearts. Catholicism, on the other hand, teaches salvation through faith and works. It is not based on the Bible. It is not gospel-centered. And it teaches the sacraments, the penance, transubstantiation, purgatory, all these things that are actually extra biblical. And all these things add to and twist the truth of the gospel. But essentially, because there's such a big element of good works, that is why Catholics are so passionate about transforming society. Because in their system, good works are part of earning salvation. And listen, I'll say this clearly. Yes, Catholics often stand for good things, things that I agree with. They defend the life of the unborn. They honor the family. They uphold morality. On those points, we can agree. But agreement on moral values is not the same thing as a unity in the gospel. And to every Bible-believing Christian, the gospel is, or at least should be, everything. It is the way, the only way that we can have peace with God and a relationship with God. So as Bible-believing Christians, should our aim really be to moralize our society? I have only seen this in America. I have not seen this in Europe among Christians there who live out their faith faithfully in their secular society. This is a uniquely American thing. And I think it makes our Christianity more comfortable because we don't have to be scared of what our neighbor thinks because we have a majority Christian government. But that doesn't make our neighbor a Christian. That doesn't preach Christ to our neighbor. And another thing it does is that it confuses people at large because a lot of people would think that Christianity is just about upholding these moral virtues versus knowing God personally through the gospel, not through the obedience of law. And yes, Catholic Christianity is more about moralism, but it is not the truth that will get you to heaven. I get it. Some moralism seems good. The world is on fire. Our children are being indoctrinated. Evil is called good. And it's tempting to think that we want to win our country back for God. But that's not our calling. Our calling is to preach Christ and Him crucified and to live holy lives that display the gospel, not replace it with political activism. This is what God has convicted me of because my own heart was more on the side of activism a lot of the time, even if it wasn't out loud. And when we forget the gospel, we turn into moralists instead of missionaries. And moralism hasn't saved anyone. So what should we do as evangelical Christians to respond to the Catholic-led Christian nationalism? Number one, we can recognize shared values, but don't confuse them for shared faith. We can appreciate what's good, but be clear about what is true. We don't necessarily need to cozy up to the commentators that are Catholic. We can say the things that we agree on, but stand firm on what is true. Number two, keep the gospel at the center. Our mission isn't to legislate holiness, it is to proclaim Christ. And that is why we always have to come back to the gospel, because that alone will make people holy. Number three, engage with culture, but don't idolize it. Yes, we can show up to our school board meetings, and yes, we can vote, but never forget, politics is temporary, not eternal. Number four, pray for our leaders, even the ones that we don't agree with, because that is biblical. Number five, we can stand for truth with love and courage. We don't need to scream. We can remain humble and let our speech be kind and seasoned with salt. Number six, we can live out the gospel at home, raise our kids in truth, love our spouses, serve our community. That's how we shape culture from the inside out. So let's redefine it. Biblical Christian nationalism isn't about a government ruled by Christians. It is about a nation full of Christians ruled by Christ. That is the only kind of revival that will truly last. And friends, that does not start in Washington, but in our living room, in our homes, in our churches, in our hearts. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thanks for tuning in. If this challenged you or gave you something to think about, why not share it with someone else who's wrestling with faith and politics right now? Because we can't afford to confuse moralism with the gospel.